Welcome, welcome, and thank you. We cannot wait what you're going to talk to us. It's a very interesting topic. I think I do this pretty much day in, day out with my internal and external stakeholders, and it's always a challenge. But doing it remote is even more challenging. So I cannot wait to hear what you're going to share. I'll stop
Okay.
sharing this, and you can take over.
Okay. All right. So here we go. So thank you so much, Anita. I really appreciate it. It's great to see everybody. I think that these meetups are absolutely essential, particularly as we are being remote for us as designers and us who are non-designers who just want to find out how to do this stuff and how to be sort of better design citizens. To make sure that we connect and we're able to do this sort of thing. So that's called vamping in the biz as I do my thing to try to pull up my slides. So here we go. Here we go. And click on present. And got that going on. And then I am going to share my screen. It says here, Anita, that host disabled participant screen sharing. So maybe I can get a special dispensation.
Do we have Zoom experts? Christus! Okay, I'm just seeing everyone.
At the reunion.
Yeah, check
How do I
like
do
your
that?
security icon. If you have a security icon down in the bottom corner, check that and click on it, see if it pulls up a menu and it might allow for screen sharing.
Security is on the top left. I clicked on it. And what should I do?
Look for if it lets participants share.
Under share, there is a caret. Okay.
Yeah, I guess it depends on which version you're on.
Allow participants to share screen. All right. Did it. Can you try again?
Good times. Look at that collaboration. I like it. That's actually one of the tips. So let's see here. I think I need that. And then I'm going to share. So my friends, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, all right. So here we go. So how to run an effective creative kickoff. Being able to run an effective creative kickoff is absolutely essential to making sure that the project gets off to a good start. I'm also going to talk about what a creative kickoff is, some tips and tricks, because what will one of these things be without tips and tricks? And then also how to frame the creative kickoff when you are talking about it to the stakeholders, to the participants. So let's, as Anita mentioned, my name is Vince Tardy. I've been around for a while. I've led development teams, I've led design teams, I've led UX teams, and I've done all of those things myself. Every nook and cranny of design, from that to digital animation to you name it, I've done it. I love it all, and I could talk about this for hours, but we have 1 hour, so I better move on. You can find me at Vince Tardy anywhere on the internet, or you can just go to vincetardy.com. I made it really, really easy for you. So next. So first question is, what is a creative kickoff meeting? So there's probably some sort of really specific definition that is accepted worldwide, but this is the definition that I use. It's the first meeting where the client gets to know you. And I intentionally started off with that. I didn't start off with, it's the meeting where you gather all kinds of information and that sort of thing, that's totally true. But it really is the meeting where the client gets to know you. If you put yourself in your client's shoes and you think about it from their perspective, they're spending lots of money in order to get this project right. And there's somebody who just said, yes, let's take a chance on you, designer, on you, organization. And they want to make sure, they want to feel good about the choice that they made. And so you want them to find out a little bit more about you, your team, and your process. And you want to find out as much about them, about what they're like, about what they, how they interact. Are they talkative? Are they fun? Are they serious? That sort of thing. That will help you as you're going down the line when you are presenting your deliverables and when you're going through the process to find out more information about them. So it's also the first meeting where you begin to dig into the design objectives for the project. And this is important. Formulate the ideas that will set the overall design direction in motion. Something important that I'm going to come back to over and over again is that the creative kickoff is not the beginning and end. It is not the alpha and the omega. It is the start of a conversation. And that is really important to know. So the start of an ongoing conversation. And once you let go of the notion that it's not, the only place that you're going to get information, and that if you don't get everything that you need at that meeting, then that's it, you're doomed. Let go of that notion, and then you're going to be in the right headspace. And I recommend being really literal about it. Those of you who have been with me in creative kickoffs, you'll know that I actually say that, at the very start of the meeting, that this is the start of an ongoing conversation. And that takes some of the pressure off, both on you and the participants in the meeting and the client. So then nothing has to be absolutely perfect. And again, the whole idea of framing it as a conversation implies a dialogue, implies a back and forth. So we want to get away from anything that allows them to say, well, that's what we hired you for, which I'm sure everybody has heard at some point or another. So particularly in these days when we are all remote and we can't go to a client site and that sort of thing, we're going to be presenting these things via Zoom or BlueJean or WebEx or whatever you decide. Google Hangouts, I want to leave that out. And the key to doing that is having a lot of preparation beforehand. So some of the stuff might seem really, really obvious, and you're like, wow, I came to this meetup to find this out, but it's really important to do this sort of stuff beforehand. The more stuff that you can prep beforehand and get it in front of your client, and the more information that you can get beforehand, the looser you'll be able to be during your creative kickoff, and it'll be more engaging and more fun. So first things first, send out an agenda. Pull an agenda together, even if you're not an agenda person, be sure to do so. I usually keep my creative kickoffs around 2 hours, and I'll explain why in just a few minutes. But here's just a snapshot of what mine look like, my agenda looks like. I have introductions, usually spend about 10 minutes on those. I give an overview of our design process. And although that might seem like a waste of time when you're doing a creative kickoff, because you're like, after all, they hired you, they like your process and that sort of thing. I think it's important to define the design deliverables that your clients are going to see, that they're going to receive. Just give a walkthrough of the process. Talk about some of these deliverables. Are you delivering stylescapes or style tiles? Show an example of it. Tell them what it is. Are you doing prototypes? Show an example, a screenshot of your Figma work area. Talk a little bit about what it is. Let them know what these design deliverables are, and make sure that you and the participants, you and your client, are speaking the same language. And that's the importance of this design process overview. Then you do a design requirements overview. So that's where you take the business objectives that you've learned about the project. And this is very important, you think about those business objectives and you filter them through a design lens. So whereas, they may have, a number of business objectives like, increase sales by X%, or, make X or Y thing easier to find. Think about like, okay, so if I was framing this question to think about how I would solve it from a design perspective, make make sign up form easier to use in order to do X. Or think about something that's like actionable or visual or tangible. And then just kind of list those things from that perspective, from a design perspective, to make sure that you are talking about business objectives, yes, but you're already starting to frame it in terms of, this is what I can do from a design standpoint, from a visual standpoint, and kind of connect those dots like right off of the bat. After you do that, then you do an exercise. And it's really important to have a design exercise as part of your creative kickoff. And I'm going to talk about my activity of choice, which is the rapid site assessment, in just a moment. But as you can see, I've actually devoted the bulk of my creative kickoff to the design exercise. And that does two things. One thing is you want to make sure that the energy level and the engagement stays high, particularly if you're on Zoom. It's so easy for cats to just check out, to like, have like the blank screen, and then they're like, doing some sort of a deliverable instead of participating in your awesome creative kickoff. You want the exercise to draw people out. You want to have the engagement. You want to have the discussion. And if you're not particularly like, I try to think of like a great way to say it. If you're not like an outgoing person normally, if you're not like a person that just like loves talking to clients and that sort of stuff, the rapid site assessment is a great way to talk about the design objectives, to talk about design, to do that sort of thing, to start conversation without having to be, some sort of world-class MC. And I don't mean an MC like, I was about to say the Beastie Boys for some reason, but whatever. So you have all that sort of stuff. And then very important, to put a bow on it at the end, you review the action items. When you review the action items, it's great because the clients like to say like, okay, these are the things that we learned today. And it's really kind of like a good way to kind of show the value of the exercise right there at the end. So they can see that and say like, okay, great. We got a lot of cool stuff out of this. And also send out a design survey beforehand. The design survey is a great tool for getting a lot of details from a likes and dislikes perspective. So you don't have to spend a lot of that time during the creative kickoff asking those sort of questions. Send out the survey beforehand. I like using Google Forms. You can use something slick like I forget the one where everything's zooming all around the place, but you can use like SurveyMonkey or something like that, and you can get the information. Some of the questions that I like to do, well, the first one's not a question, it's defining who should take the survey. And I usually say, if you are going to be participating in the creative kickoff, then you should take the survey. What I don't want them to send the survey out to like, all their stakeholders and their boss and their boss's boss and all of that sort of stuff. And all of a sudden you're getting, tons and tons of information, which may or may not be useful. And I like to think of defining off the bat, who should take the survey as a way of making the client a gatekeeper for quality answers on their end. And I do something else around that later on, which I'll talk about as well. Ask for their name, ask for goals and objectives. I don't say design goals or objective. I say goals and objectives and then translate it into design goals and objectives later. Adjectives. Adjectives are important, particularly if we're doing this remotely. I ask them for adjectives to describe the desired design outcome. And I even tell them during the actual creative kickoff when we're meeting that I collect adjectives. How they talk about design, how they talk about stuff that they like, that they don't like, things that they want. Those adjectives are important, and it's a great way, it's a great shorthand for figuring out what you need to do from a design perspective. Just kind of go through, start pulling out those adjectives, ask them directly for adjectives. I asked them to describe any must-have components on the site. You know, is there anything that really needs to go on the site? That's really helpful when you are chit-chatting with your fine UX professional and they're trying to figure out the stuff that needs to go to be built from a wireframing perspective. And then I asked for sites that they like and sites that they don't like. And here's something important. We're going to be using some of those sites that they like in the rapid site assessment, which I'll talk about in just a moment. We're not going to be using all of them. And I say this with nothing but love in my heart. Most of the time when your clients are showing sites that they like, it will be, you know, maybe a few sites that are pretty good. Then there'll be Amazon. Amazon will always be in there. Discard that immediately. Don't talk about Amazon. Just that's a totally different animal. And then there'll be a lot of sites that are within their industry that are actually pretty bad, that are not that great. So you're going to have to curate their responses accordingly. So energy and participation, those things are absolutely key. First things first, even though I am showing you slides right now, minimize the number of slides that you use in your presentation. I mean, during the creative kickoff. I recommend using just the bare minimum, you know, particularly at the beginning when you're talking about your design process. By the time I get to the rapid site assessment, I've ditched the slides and I want to make sure that I'm engaging. So just use the amount that you need and no more. I know it's really useful for folks to sometimes, you know, have that structure and have the slides and go through and that sort of stuff. But you'll find your participants starting to check out a bit if you slideshow them to death. So don't overdo it. Set the expectation that the meeting will be participatory. Set that expectation right up front. So we don't want anybody to coast. Again, we don't want them to check out, go blank screen, go mute, that sort of thing. So just let them know that it's going to be participatory. Again, with the design exercise, more on that in a moment. Be concise. So your mileage may vary. And of course, this is with an asterisk. It depends upon, you know, what kind of project it is, how much time the client has, that sort of stuff. So you'll probably have to adjust accordingly. You can do an hour. You can do a creative kickoff in an hour. I found that sometimes that can feel a little too rushed. An hour is totally fine though, if that's what you have. 3 hours, however, again, this is only from my personal experience and only thinking about doing so remotely. 3 hours tends to drag a bit. Again, keep in mind that this is the beginning of a conversation. You're not trying to get everything. 3 hours tends to drag a little bit. For me, 2 hours really is a sweet spot. It keeps the energy level high and it allows us to move through the agenda at a pretty smooth pace. And then that allows time for conversation as well. So again, you know, you feel it out, whatever works for you. I have found that when doing these things remotely, particularly in this era of Zoom fatigue, if you can get 2 hours of their time, if you can keep the energy level high, if you can get participation going on, it will actually fly by, which is pretty surprising. So here's something. I just stuck this in here. I went back and forth as I was thinking about, you know, whether or not to stick it in there. But this is just me. People love hearing their own names. One great way to keep people from checking out during the design exercise is to quite simply say their name. I forget what the quote is that says there's no sweeter sound to someone than the sound of their own name. And it's true. I am terrible at memorizing names. I can memorize faces all the live long day. And I don't know if it's because I'm just a visual guy or what. But here's what I have to do. Again, I have coworkers who can memorize people's names and just they just got it locked. I can't do that. I have to memorize the name of my main point of contact. Then I memorize the name of my point of contact's boss, if they are in attendance, because people are going to defer to them, but it's important to make sure that they are heard, but you want to make sure that they don't wind up driving the meeting. So note who those people are, try to deflect if possible. Don't make it turn into the, hey, let's please like the person at the top. Anyway, that's, I'm diverging. So let me get back on the task here. And then write down the name of the other attendees in order of introduction. And this, again, is when you are doing this remotely, this is useful because as you go through the rapid design assessment exercise, you're going to want to know and have, these names, even though you can see them on, the little Zoom thingy, or if you're using Zoom. If you get an order, if you have the names, if you stick to it, that's really helpful because a lot of times you can go through and you can call on people by their names without, really seeing their faces, because if they're off camera, that can make it difficult. So, as they go through, do the introductions, don't check out, write down their names in that order. That's helpful. Keep a little cheat sheet, slap a sticky note on your monitor if you wish, and then people will think you're awesome. People probably think you're awesome anyway because you guys are here. Speaking of being remote, if the meeting is remote, be sure to be on camera. You have to be on camera. Again, that sounds like something that is so super obvious, but that's absolutely essential. I have this quote that I say all the time. I say it all the time. And those of you who have worked with me, you're probably going to roll your eyes, but I always say, people ignore design that ignores people. A designer by the name of Frank Chimero did that. The same could go if you just remove the word design and then put in, people leading creative kickoffs. You're going to get ignored if they can't see your face. You have to go on camera. And again, if there are folks who are off camera who are going to be reluctant to participating, don't let it happen. Even if they're off camera, call on them regularly. Call on them. So again, with the whole idea of it being a conversation. Okay, all right. So I've mentioned this design exercise maybe a billion times, and you're probably wondering, what is this design exercise? So here it is. Having an engaging and informative design exercise is super important. It is essential. I call it the tent pole. That allows for like freewheeling conversation. You can make these sort of connections. It's fun. And here's something else that's really important. Even though you are trying to find out more about them and they are trying to find out more about you, what is usually missed is the fact that you have these folks that are, these participants, these clients, they probably all have their own ideas about what constitutes design success or what they like and that sort of thing. When you do an exercise, when you do the kickoff, it's quite likely the first time that they've vocalized these sort of things and they're hearing it among each other. And a lot of times you get a lot of light bulbs. You're like, oh, like we're all really aligned on this, or like we're really divergent on this. If you think about it from that perspective, if you are not a designer, you're probably not just going to like hang out around the water cooler, just talking about design with your buddies, your coworkers. But so that's something that's important. So here's my favorite exercise, and it's called the rapid site assessment. The rapid site assessment. You should curate 10 websites. You take a few websites from the design survey, then you go through and you find some sites that you think represent, what's awesome, what's good out there, and then you may find some sites that maybe they're strategic competitors. Have a nice mix. of different websites, I intentionally try to find websites that are not in the industry of the client that I'm talking to. So if we have clients that are, in the insurance industry, I will go out of my way to find websites that have nothing to do with insurance. You have to get them out of their comfort zone. And so you find these 10 websites, and then you can either have a pre-printed sheet that has a list from 1 to 10, or since everyone is remote, just have them have a piece of paper and something to write with, have them list 1 through 10 on the left-hand side. For each site, you do a scroll for 30 seconds. You scroll through the site, you point out some things, right? But you don't make any sort of subjective observations. You can be objective about it to say like, oh, like here's something that a lot of folks are doing these days from a design perspective, that I point this out. If you notice, a lot of organizations are putting their social media icons, in the footer. You can use it to start defining some terms like, oh, so if you notice how they have this thing that's kind of peeking up over the bottom, that's called an affordance. You can push back against the concept of the fold. You can push back against the concept of the homepage slider. You can use these examples to do that sort of thing. So scroll through for 30 seconds. And then as you scroll through, you have the participants rate each site from 1 to 5. 1 being they absolutely hate it, 5 being they completely dig it. You go through this sites 1 through 10, and then the idea behind this whole process is, if you're only showing these sites for 30 seconds, they have to give you a gut reaction. You have to keep them slightly off balance, make sure that they give you their gut reaction. And then after you've shown all 10 websites, just go around the room, or since you're doing remotely, go down your list, your handy list that you've created, and then have each person give you their score. So you can do one of two things. You can write down the score that each person gave, or what I like to do is I have a spreadsheet in like Google Slides, and I have like a formula set up. So I put in the names of each person, and then I have the columns 1 through 10, and then I put in the score that each person gives, and then it gives like a nice calculation there at the bottom, gives an average. It's a pretty basic setup. If anybody's interested, I'm more than happy to send you my template. So then as they go through, you plug in their number, and then you just choose 1 or 2 folks, and then you have them ask, why did you give it a 5? Why did you give this a 3? And as simple as this exercise sounds, it will generate tons of conversation. You'll find out all kinds of cool and awesome stuff about what they like and what they don't like. And it's really engaging. And the trick is, as you go through these 10 websites, make sure that you manage to call on everyone. And when I say call on everyone, I don't mean like for each site, every person gets to provide some sort of feedback. You can do that if it's a smaller group. If it's a larger group, if you're presenting to a lot of people, then just get 1 or 2 people each time, and then get them to give their feedback. Like I said, it's engaging, it's interesting, and you will get the most value out of the rapid site assessment exercise than many things. So other things to note. Have someone in the meeting who can take good notes. Some people in the meeting, some people who are doing these presentations are awesome at being able to take notes while they are presenting. So they'll say something, they'll ask a question, and then they'll start doing notes and that sort of stuff. Oh, speaking of ask a question, most of what you should be doing during the creative kickoff is asking questions or listening. So if you are doing a lot of exposition, then you probably want to dial that back a bit. So ask questions, think about improv. If somebody says something, you're like, yes, and then keep the conversation going. So ask questions, listen a lot, and a lot of times you will have, as these clients are discovering what they are thinking, what their design perspectives are, they will start conversations amongst each other, and then sometimes you have to kind of like moderate and that sort of thing. Bonus points if you have a UX designer or a researcher on the call. I love UX people. They're fantastic. And if you are going through and you're talking design stuff and that sort of thing, if you're able to turn to your awesome UXer, your UX pal, UX buddy, and say, hey, Anita, can you tell us why we should avoid using the homepage sliders? Then your awesome UX buddy will be able to talk about reasons why, both using data points or through the lens of best practices. And since it's their bread and butter, they're able to articulate that super clearly, and you'll see heads nodding. And it's great being able to have that superpower, have that in your pocket. So bonus points if you have that. This is kind of wacky, but just use the first person plural whenever possible. So if you're talking about the project, like I say we a lot, like, okay, so our project, what do we want to do with the site? That sort of thing. You have to let the client know that they have skin in the game, and they need to want the overall site, the overall project to be as successful as possible, as much as you want the site to be as successful as possible. So I say we all the time. I talk about collaboration. I talk about conversation, because I want to make sure that it feels like we are all involved in a grand effort together. If you can get them on board with that, you will have awesome clients who are really easy to work with. So here's something, and I can say this as a designer, you will have a designer on the call most of the time. And again, this is just talking remotely and that sort of stuff. And when you're going through and you're doing a heuristic of the existing site, or if you are, talking about some of the design decisions that were made, just be aware that the person that probably had a large hand in a lot of the design decisions and that sort of thing is on the call. And here you are, you're an outsider, and you're coming in, and there's like an in-house designer. I say befriend the designer on the call, and that doesn't mean like, say like, oh, you're absolutely right about everything. But go out of your way to, at the very beginning, ask them a few questions. Ask them, what they think about something. And then as you go through and you are making your own observations, maybe refer back to what the designer on the call said. Because you can have a grumpy designer on the call that could deep six your whole, creative kickoff by, just not being super pleased about, being in this whole sort of situation. Or again, you can make said designer feel like they are part of the process, that you are here to evolve what they have and not just tear it all down and just build something new. So make sure your designer on the call is along for the ride, as I like to say. And then, once again, just make sure you give a summary of what you covered at the end. Even if you have to just kind of give high-level bullet points, that makes the people on the call feel good that they have gotten real value out of what you have done. And I'm sure there's like tons of other stuff, but I just want to make sure that I left some time for some questions and that sort of thing. And yeah, so that's my process, and I'm sticking to it. So what sort of questions or comments do I have, or do you have any sort of tips or tricks that you usually use in terms of a creative kickoff that you would like to share?
I also use that. We called it the 30-second gut test, but the rapid sight assessment.
Nice.
I've used that, excuse me, when I was a web designer at George Mason University working with academics in
Oh,
a
excellent.
center, and used that exercise because they wanted to redesign their site. And I knew there was a lot of like emotional investment in the current design and that sort of thing. So I tried, this is the first time I'd done that. And so I did that, that rapid site assessment, and it really, it sparked a lot of conversation, and B, I think it opened a lot of eyes to see, oh, here's where we're on agreement and here's where we're still disagreeing. And then it gave me the opportunity to know to go to those individually with the ones that were maybe not in agreement with everyone else, and kind of, talk to them more and tease out what their objections were. And so it was a really great exercise. I highly recommend it.
That's cool. I'm glad that worked out for you. And it really does, you get a lot of information, and it really does make the time go by pretty quickly as the conversations start rolling. So cool. That's neat to hear another example of that in the wild.
Hey Vince, we had Sarah. She had to leave because she had a class. But she did leave a question in the chat.
Sure.
She thanked you for hosting and also presenting.
Oh, cool.
She's asking, as a new designer who got a response about maybe doing an app redesign.
Okay.
I had a question. Before even getting to the point of the meeting, would you create a pitch or a price deck for a client? And do you have recommendations for getting that freelance hire discussion started?
Oh, so interesting. So, the question here is, before getting to the meeting, creating a pitch or price deck for a client, and recommendations for getting that freelance hire discussion started. So usually, in terms of when you're, and this is a slight deviation, but if you're going to be talking about like a freelance client, and you're talking to them, and then there's a whole lot was like sort of the awkward money conversation. I actually would not have that as a pitch deck. When you're talking about this sort of thing with like a potential client, you want to find out more about like, okay, so, what is, essentially what you want to do is find out like a general ballpark of where they are thinking. And then that gives you a starting point. And you can do that a lot easier with a conversation and asking them questions about, talk to us, about what you need, convey, just generally speaking, the level of effort without attaching some sort of like number to this sort of thing. Don't lead with the number. Definitely don't shy away from it. Have a conversation, talk about the numbers. Don't include it in a pitch deck. So in terms of getting that conversation started, again, just putting the ball in their court and get them to start talking about, generally speaking, people will talk in these generalizations, what they're thinking in terms of like a range. Start there.
Yeah, I think it's good to sort of ask if like, what have they budgeted for this effort? Because then you find out, have they actually thought about a budget, or they're just sort of looking around? Or if their budget is like much smaller than you think the scope of effort is, then like, hey, when I give you my proposal, this is what we can do for this budget.
Absolutely. That's totally right. And, I could give a whole other presentation about this, about like, value-based pricing and, stop charging hourly right at this exact moment. Stop doing it. I could do a whole thing about that, but I won't, because then I'll go like way off topic. But, happy to talk about that some other time. So
I was curious, Vince. So in this meeting, would you use this meeting to kind of figure out who among the clients or the stakeholders, who has decision-making power versus who needs to be consulted, or do you find that out in other ways?
So that's a great question. And you find that out in other ways. I will say that when you are on the call, when you're on the creative kickoff call, it's a little bit easier to do in person, because then you can, as I'm often told, the one piece of advice that I give my son all the time, I always say, like, hey buddy, read the room. You know, reading the room is like just the most underrated skill of all time. But I digress. And that's easier to do when you're in person. But when you're on when you're on a Zoom, you will find that the person that has the most decision-making power will say the least on the call. And with that in mind, like when they do say something, you can feel the conversation shift, but you can't let the center of gravity, you can't let the center of gravity of the conversation immediately like orient towards this person who's just kind of like hanging back and then says a thing. So yeah, that's how you know. Usually the person on the call who what you says the least, a lot of time, is the person with the most decision-making power. And when they do say something and you hear other folks kind of orienting their answers to that person, and you know, like, aha, that's the, as they say in the movie, what's that movie, Swingers, the guy behind the guy. Anyway, I age myself here. But yeah, so you just want to make sure that when people are giving their opinions, that they're giving their opinions, and that they're not trying to let the big cheese on the call know what they're thinking. I don't know what I'm saying there, but you get the idea. Great questions. Let's see, I'm just looking at some of the other sort of questions in the chat. Love the Vince hand motions. Robin, I'm sure you missed that. Hopefully they do hand motions at the Washington Post. If not, then I'm sorry. Let's see here. Helpful to dig a little for what they think is modern or contemporary. They might not mean the same thing as me. Yes. So Chris had that's a very good thing. Finding out what they consider to be contemporary design. And
yeah, this came up. I watch HGTV probably way too much.
no,
But one of the shows I watch, the designer was really going down a path based on an adjective that the client used. And then when she showed the client her like vision board, I guess it was called. And the client's like, oh, that's not what I mean by modern at all. It's like, you know, so it's kind of good to kind of figure that out before you go too far down the road.
That's absolutely right. And, you know, and again, this is some other sort of topic in terms of talking about, you know, some of the tools and the overall process that, you know, that I use. But I'm a big fan of using stylescapes. You know, after you have the creative kickoff, and then you go into the lab and you start doing your design process. I use stylescapes, which are like mood boards, sort of, but it's essentially, you know, a collection of typography, imagery, colors, buttons, icons, things like that, to define a design direction, not layout, but to define a design direction. And I tell them up front, I'm like, hey, you know, as one of the deliverables out of this whole process, you're going to get 2 stylescapes. One stylescape, I'm going to try to really nail the design direction. I'm going to try to, as they say in the Olympics, stick the landing. And, you know, and for the other design direction, I am intentionally going to go outside of your comfort zone. And you know, are they going to go for the design direction that is outside of their comfort zone? Like, yeah, give us the super open GL rotating, blah, blah, blah. Maybe not. But the idea is to pull them outside of their expected orbit. And clients will feel less trepidation if they have a design direction that they feel like, okay, yes, they nailed it. And they will feel more open to saying like, okay, if we have this design direction, that's good, and they kind of nailed it. Maybe we should see about like some of these other things over here, like on the shelf. And a lot of times I've been able to steer clients away from, doing just another site that looks like everybody else in their industry by taking that approach, right in their lane or, just outside their orbit. And the answer usually winds up somewhere in between.
Vince, I think we have one more question from Lucy. She's
Oh, great.
asking, when determining objectives, do you run into having them offering solutions to these objectives, usually pre-research, or how do you handle these situations?
Excellent. So that's great. So when determining objectives, do you run into them offering solutions to these objectives, usually pre-research, and then how do you handle these solutions? And this is the biggest cop-out answer of all times. And everyone's going to hate this answer, but here it is. I note their solutions. I note what they're saying. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I didn't really think about that. And then I move on. And then I totally ignore it. I acknowledge them and I make sure that they are acknowledged. I never, use that as a point to branch out into another conversation. I acknowledge it and then I immediately move on to some other sort of topic. And that sounds terrible, but you really can get derailed during your creative kickoff by somebody who does that sort of thing. And in terms of offering these solutions pre-research and that sort of thing, we don't want that to happen because we're all good designers here, and we believe in data, we believe in best practices, and we believe in the idea of gathering this information and using our creativity. That's what they hired us for. And so we take these things and we make sure that we are solving problems. And something that I always say, I always tell people this sort of thing, and it sounds cliched, but I would tell my team members that art is creativity without constraints, and design is creativity within constraints. And being able to define what those constraints are is part of this creative kickoff. It's part of the discovery process. And once you know sort of like where the guardrails are, then you know exactly what sort of things you can do from a creative standpoint that will kind of keep us within those guardrails, but not have us boxed in, so to speak. So yeah. Oh, wait, here's another question. Anita, do you mind if I read this other question from the chat? It says here, this is from Andre. Vince, you mentioned that you have worn many hats on your path to where you are. How do you feel that each has played into your methods today? Wow, nice. Okay, all right. So that's a good one. So I talked about my background. I talked about I have been a teacher. I was an adjunct design instructor for many years, and I use that aspect of things all the time when I'm doing stuff like this, or when I'm doing a creative kickoff. I draw upon that all the time, and I think of it as teaching as opposed to in a conversation. So that there's the whole idea of doing print design. I refer to print design a lot when I'm talking about web design. As I'm talking about web design, I refer to print design because print design will have so many examples of basic design principles that I'm able to use that as a reference as I kind of go back and forth. A digital animator, in my days as a digital animator, I'm able to use that lens to talk through any sort of like animation, micro animation or otherwise. And then finally, as somebody who loves like CSS and loves development and that sort of thing, and I've at previous positions, I've led development teams and led creative teams. Something else that I say when I'm talking about design, I'm thinking about how to make it work when I'm trying to make something work, I'm thinking about, the overall design and how people are going to interact with it. So that's kind of like a long question, but I mean, a long answer. I hope I answered your question. I use these different facets.
Vince, you did mention you have a hard stop. So you have 1 minute and we have a question from Robin.
Oh, of course I'm going to answer Robin's question. Who cares about my hard stop when Robin Bortz has a question? So here we go. How do you go about addressing some technical constraints while group ideating, i.e. accessibility, SEO, etc.? What a fantastic question. And I'm glad that you brought that up. So 2 things. When you are doing the creative kickoff, and I intentionally call it the creative kickoff, your clients, your participants are going to try to start diving into functionality. Or there is usually like a developer or some sort of like manager type that is immediately going to start talking about things through the lens of functionality. Again, note it and then be very specific to say like, this ain't that meeting, you're going to have other meetings where you're able to talk about that sort of thing. And you have to say this early on in the kickoff. Say this is the creative kickoff. Happy to note any sort of functional sort of things. But if people are going to start talking about functionality, they will go on an off ramp and you'll never see them again as conversations talking about the how. And what we need to get back is we need to get back to the why. And then things like, accessibility, SEO, that sort of thing. It's super important at the very beginning when you're talking about your design process to say that it is a part of your design process and it is an important and essential part of your design process. Show it in the part of the process and say, you are here. Like, so you go to the mall and then you look and you've got the little dot that says you are here. From a design perspective, a creative kickoff perspective, let them know that, this is where you are. Later, we'll be talking about that sort of stuff, but it's an essential part of the process. Did I just freeze? Am I frozen?
He froze at a point, but it's a perfect little moment.
Wow, that is super exciting. So that's how I want you all to remember me. So any other sort of questions or comments?
It's 7:31. You asked me to remind you, so.
Oh, thank you so much. So this was super fun. I had a great time. Great questions, everybody. I really appreciate it. Robin says it's snowing in DC, which is super cool. And if you have any,
that very excitedly.
Oh, I can dig it. And Chris just confirmed. If you have any other sort of like questions or comments, just shoot them to Anita, and then she'll follow with me, or follow me on social media.
Or you can post it on the meetup discussion board if you have any questions. I'll try to. And one thing I forgot to ask is if you could post this video on YouTube. Yes or no? I think I'll send out a request and ask if I hear no, then it won't go up. But it'll be great to have it on our meetup channel.
Oh, right on. You should go for it.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, Vince. This was great.
Awesome.
Hi,
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.